with wonderful people all over this country. She is a beautiful
Guyana will become the next Dubai, and we, the citizens of Guyana, are super excited to benefit from our homeland the same way the citizens of Dubai benefit from theirs.
This is what life is like for citizens from the Emirate of Dubai. When you are born, your parents pay nothing. Your delivery and checkups for the next 9 months are all free. Then you grow up and you go to school. Local school in Dubai is free. And so are universities, because Dubai will pay for you to get a degree.
I studied at Zayed University and New York University, both for free.
Who's going to pay for that?
The government.
Then you get married. If you can't afford the wedding, you get $20,000 to throw a wedding. And after marriage, every local Dubai family gets this: free land. Did you get free land?
Yes.
Did you get free land?
Yes.
Did you get free land?
Sure, yes.
And if you cannot afford the home, then you get a grant to build it for free.
I also can't afford building a house. I can get a 0 interest loan on housing. Zero.
If you need to go to the hospitals are free. And if you need surgery that's not available here, they will fly you to another country to get treatment for free. When you become a senior citizen, you get discounts, many discounts. And if you live alone and can't afford it, Dubai will even send a caretaker to look after you for free. And when you die, well, in Dubai, that's also free. Your funeral will be taken care of, and Dubai will build a full tent with air conditioning within 5 hours of your death next to your home, so your friends can come and say goodbye to you.
Guyana will become the next Dubai.
with wonderful people all over this country. She is a beautiful Guyana.
Welcome to Globespan 24/7 as we bring you our Monday night program from New York, from Maryland, from Guyana, and around the world. We want to thank our host, Noah Singh, for making this platform available. And of course, tonight we have Ryan Gobin as our technical specialist. Tonight, we want to discuss a very important topic in the lifeblood of Guyana, which is IDPADA, which is the International Decade for People of African Descent, and specifically in Guyana. And what is interesting about this topic, and I've been spreading it as often as I can, that we are not African and we are not Indian. We are of African descent and we are of Indian descent. And that's why the United Nations specifically speaks, when they planned this program 1 decade from 2015 to 2024, they specifically said it was for the International Decade for People of African Descent. And tonight, to help us along that journey to discuss it, is the CEO for IDPADA Guyana, Ms. Olive Sampson. Ms. Sampson, welcome to the program tonight.
Thank you ever so much, Mr. Sugrim, for your invitation. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the International Decade for People of African Descent, specifically the Assembly of organizations that have come together in Guyana to work on this United Nations decade. So thanks for the opportunity.
And of course, with me is my co-host, Dr. Rose. Dr. Rose, welcome.
Thank you, Charles, and welcome to all our listeners, and welcome to you, Ms. Sampson. Thanks.
Ms. Sampson, many Guyanese I'm sure many have known you, but many of us also do not know you. And I know Dr. Rose normally asks this question, but I want to preempt him. So tell our audience a little about yourself. Who is Miss Olive Sampson?
That's a good question. Thank you for the opportunity to share. So I am a Guyanese of African descent who has devoted her career to international relations, but also to volunteerism in the cause for people of African descent. So while I have resided in the United States for quite so many years, I worked with the Guyanese community in Guyana and in the Washington, D.C. area to support issues of concern to the Guyanese community through Guy Aid, for example. In the United States, I've done volunteer work through an organization called Cedar Mocks, raising funds and assisting students with scholarships from the Washington, D.C. area. Another called Hoop Dreams. I served as a mentor for students coming from disadvantaged communities, helping many students who were the first from their families to enter college. I served as a mentor for several years. In addition, I have worked with the National Council of Negro Women of the United States, an organization founded in the 1930s by Mary McLeod Bethune. She also founded Bethune College, that you may be familiar with. She was a leader of the African American community and of African American women. The National Council of Negro Women has chapters all across the United States. During the time that I worked with the National Council of Negro Women, it was headed by Dorothy Height, whom you may or may not know was a civil rights leader in her own right. And in fact, if you look at the iconic image of the 1963 March on Washington, she is standing right behind Martin Luther King. A lot of what I learned about what it takes to serve as a volunteer in a cause that is as enduring as that of the struggle of people of African descent, I learned at the feet of people like Dorothy Height. And I understand the kind of determination it takes, the kind of negotiation, and the kind of understanding one has to have, particularly in communities that are as diverse as ours in Guyana, respecting the rights of others, even as you forge a way for those people whose concerns you carry.
Very good, Ms. Sampson. The United Nations, as I said earlier, they have put aside this decade from 2015 to 2024 to really implement or to have program of activities for international or people of African descent. So can you tell our audience, Ms. Sampson, what are some of the objectives of the United Nations in undertaking this decade for activities of people of African descent?
The United Nations speaks to three major themes: recognition, justice, and development. And within that very broad rubric, one has to determine in one's own community what that means. But they're looking at what are issues pertaining to economic development, issues pertaining to history and the recognition of our history and contributions to the nation states in which we live, questions of justice, which actually speaks to equity, but also to the justice systems and the issue of law enforcement, the treatment of people of African descent within the justice system, their engagements with law enforcement, that kind of thing. So in each nation, one has to derive from that very broad rubric what one has to do. But there's also a very specific program of action that the United Nations laid out that speaks to what it is that the international community needs to do, multilateral agencies, nation states, and with nation states, civil society. What it is that those various bodies have to do. And I'd be happy to pull up, and I can do so very quickly, that document and give you some specific examples of what nation states are called on to do, and what, deriving from that, what civil society ought to be doing. But imagine that we're speaking about, let us talk, for example, just about recognition. Recognition means acknowledging what the contributions have been. And so we can speak to what it meant that in 1763, enslaved Africans rebelled, created a republic, held it for a year, right? The Berbice Republic, fought again, constant battles for freedom. Those were the stepping stones that led ultimately to the national character that fought for independence. Independence had its roots in 1763. We, as African Guyanese, or Guyanese of African descent, look for our history to be reflected in the national story. It ought to be told, students in schools ought to be taught about those early years that stood as a foundation for our nation. Because every nation, every ethnic group rather, that lives within the borders of Guyana has made a contribution to the nation. African Guyanese had a 200-year head start on that. And that time period ought to be given a sacred place along with all others in the formation of our nation, right? Just as how the Amerindians, or the indigenous people who gave up their land, we need to pay attention to that and recognize, respect, and honor that and hold it in a special place. Each group, indigenous people who came along afterwards, whether they were Chinese or people from the subcontinent of India, all of those have made sacred contributions. We wouldn't be here where we are today without that. And so one of the issues that the UN recognized is that people of African descent, history, and their contributions, not only saying, oh, they were enslaved, but what did that mean and what did they contribute? How many Guyanese, for example, recognize and understand that the very coastline along which we live was developed by people of African descent who were never paid? All those canals that ensure that we don't have flooding, right? All those brick dam, the seawall, the Parliament building, and they can go on, they were built by enslaved labor. African Guyanese children and all Guyanese children ought to grow up recognizing that and other contributions. The fact that we were enslaved, but that is not sufficient. The children only know African Guyanese were enslaved. That is, in fact, it is not motivating. It's demotivating if that is all you know about your ancestry. You start off with one leg tied behind you. But if you understand that this road that we're walking on, the fact that we have a coastline, the fact that Guyana contributed to the wealth of so many nations because of the enslaved labor, that is empowering. And
well said, Ms. Sampson. And before Dr. Rose come on, and I don't want to cast blame, why are we not told of these important land contribution to our development, to our country?
I would argue that it comes out of that entire colonial period, because, as you know, the story of the. I'm sorry that my watch is talking. The story of the until the lion tells his own story, it's told by the hunter. Isn't that how this thing goes? I may have gotten it a bit confused, but the point is this, that we have not taken the time We are thankful for people like Walter Rodney and others who have delved into our history and have told a history that is not colored by the viewpoint, the perspective of our colonial masters, as it were, those people in the past who could write the story that they wanted to write. In an independent Guyana, in a nation state, we need to use our resources and encourage the kind of research that tells a balanced story of our history. And so we have to, that's one part of our independence that we have not fully matured on, telling our history as it should be told, not by the way the British told us, nor the way the Dutch. What is our story? You know, and the documents are there. We can research them. We can learn and share and have pride. And one of the things that the United Nations calls for, that states should do, is to make sure that places of historic interest and of historic importance to African descendants should be acknowledged, should be properly identified, and the history of that place told. That's some work that needs to be done. And so that's one of the things that IDPADA-G has been pushing for.
Dr. Rose?
Yes, good night again, Ms. Sampson. I will be asking you some questions. It's not that I am anti-IDPADA-G, but just for our audience to know. When was this organization formed?
This organization was formed in 2017. It is an umbrella organization. In 2017, if I may expand on your question, so it was didn't just pop up in 2017. In 2016, then President Granger, addressed a conference of Coffee 250, at which he said, look, the decade started in 2015. What is the African Guyanese community doing to respond to this opportunity that the decade provides? The world is focused on bettering the lives of people of African descent. What are African Guyanese doing? He said he encouraged non-governmental organizations, civil society, to come together and to figure out what it is that can be done. And so for a little more than a year, organizations met and they came together and put together a proposal that said, look, we're going to come together under an umbrella group, which is now IDPADA-G. And here is a body of work that we would like this organization to do. That organization will be supported by a secretariat, of which I am now the chief executive officer. And we will put forward this proposal to government for their support, which is how a proposal went to President Granger, to the Ministry of Culture. It was then the Ministry of Social Cohesion, Culture, Youth and Sport. And it went to Parliament, and for that a subvention was given. So formed in 2017 after a body of work was done, negotiating among civil society groups to come up with a structure that is IDPADA-G, an umbrella organization which started in 2017 with 31 members and has now grown to 65 members. In fact, we have a new member just 2 weeks ago, 66.
I am puzzled. Why is such a long name? I can't remember the name of the organization.
May I help you with that?
Yes, help me.
The name just simply is drawn straight out of what it is. It's the International Decade for People of African Descent. The only things that are added to that are assembly to recognize the group of organizations that have come together, and the name, of course, of our country, Guyana.
Okay. Now, how were you elected or selected? Was there an election for you to become the CEO, or you were appointed?
There was a job vacancy that was announced that was placed in the newspapers in Guyana. I think it was in more than one newspaper. Okay. And I saw that job vacancy and I applied. Others applied as well. I had an interview of panelists who all had came out of the human resource background, several very illustrious Guyanese who are outside of our organizations, just persons who had really long years of experience. And I was selected in that process. And then my selection was ratified by the member organizations. So that was the process.
Okay. Now, you said there are 66 members. These are all member organizations in Guyana?
All member organizations in Guyana.
Can you name a few of them?
Sure, I can. Well, some of them you'll know. The PANAF, the Pan-African Movement, an organization founded by Jocelyn Lunk, God rest her soul. Another organization would be, of course, you've heard of Coffee 250, an organization formed to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the Berbice Slave Revolution. Another organization would be People of African Descent, Sustainable Development, an agricultural group that's in good intent, West Demerara. We have the Queenstown Development Association, which is in Essequibo. We have, I can go on and on.
Okay, that's enough. I know a couple of those. Now, my next question to you is, there's a structure. You're the CEO. What other positions are there within the organization at the executive level?
At the executive level, so we have a secretariat of which I'm the chief executive officer, but IDPADA-G is a not-for-profit company or organization. We have a board or coordinating council. We have a chair of that board, and there are 8 members of the coordinating council. Those coordinating council members really rise from the membership organization of the organization. The structure is that we have the General Assembly, which is the highest decision-making body. That's all of the member organizations represented together. They are the highest decision-making body. During when they are not when they're not convened, decisions are made by the coordinating council. Coordinating council is derived from the committees that rise from the General Assembly. Those committees are Economic Committee, Education, Employment, Equity, Expiation, and Youth. Youth is cross-cutting. And so from each of those committees where member organizations and other experts are represented, they elect a chair. The chair of each of those committees rises to be a part of the board or coordinating council.
Okay.
And from that,
Okay. Now, you said it was formed in 2017. Mm-hmm. Now, I think the International Decade for Africa ends in 2024, next year. Am I right?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
What happens after?
Well, what happens after? The way that IDPADA-G has been functioning is in focusing on the development piece of our work, in capacity building, etc. We are hoping to continue our work through the writing proposals, seeking grants, etc. Because the work is not going to be done at the end of 2024. One cannot correct centuries of the kind of challenges and address all the needs that have not been addressed over centuries in a decade. So we are looking to continue our work as an organization that works as kind of a development agency, providing the kind of training, capacity building, et cetera, that we have been doing over the past 5 years.
Okay. Now, you receive money from the government, from APNU and from the PEP, am I right?
That is correct. From the government.
Can you tell our audience how much money was that over the years?
Okay, so in the first year, we received $68 million in 2018. And then each year after that, we received $100 million. Each time we submitted our request, it was completely delineated precisely what would be done with the money. And none of it, we are not a grant-making agency. The initial proposal was for the establishment of a secretariat, the staff of which would do work and provide service to the community. And that service includes, so you have to pay a staff to provide service. And work hand in hand with government to achieve to achieve the goals. So that let me just tell you, so in our first year and a half, 2.5 years, we went across the country providing technical assistance through a series of conferences to small businesses, farmers, food vendors, and we did that every time we did a conference, we did it in various communities. So we would do 10 small business conferences, and we would take with us experts drawn from government ministries to talk to people about here are various programs, here is how one can access these programs, and just provide information that people really did not have. It was quite startling to see that people did not know about. So we took with us Small Business Bureau, for example. We'd have booths throughout the conference space. We'd have the Small Business Bureau. We'd have someone from NIS, someone from GRA. Here's what you need to do as a small business, how you apply, just that kind of thing. People had an opportunity to hear a presentation and then sit at a booth and say, here's my situation, here's what I want. With food vendors, we provided them with training on food handling, food handling, and you need certification. Here's how you up your game with respect to packaging, marketing, and that kind of thing. So working hand in hand with government, we were able to reach across the community and to really help people understand, A, what is available to them through the state, and B, to improve increase their capacity to function, and to, for example, apply for, register with SBB. The number of small businesses that we helped with that form, working with them to complete that form to submit. I mean, we did not get, there were just numerous people who would come in after the conference and say, I got the form, here's what I did, anything else I need to do? And then they go. We're not getting in the middle of their relationship with SBB in any way, but simply helping people to.
So in 2017, you received $68 million, am I right?
No, we did not get any money in 2017.
2018.
First amount of money is 2018, 68.
So 2019, you received 100 million. 2020, you received 100 million from the government too?
Yeah, for every year since.
What about 2021?
Yeah, 100 million.
What about last year?
Well, last year, our subvention was curtailed in September. So we only received funds for January through August, right? So we would have received roughly 60 million.
Okay. Charles, over to you.
Ms. Sampson, you give us a litany of activities that IDPADA is doing. But when I look at I was wondering, I know what you're doing is amazing, and I think IDPADA should be given credit for that. But what I'm looking at is what was the objective for the United Nations in establishing this decade of people of African descent. And as you rightly said, the main objective were to promote respect, protection, and fulfillment of all human rights and fundamental freedom by people of African descent, promote a greater knowledge of and respect for the diverse heritage, culture, and contribution of people of African descent, and adopt and strengthen national, regional, international legal framework according to the Durban Declaration and Program of Action. So my question to you is, within this guideline that United Nations have set up, is this what you're doing, or you're doing the more micro project rather than the macro, contribution towards that, the people of African descent?
I think that what you just listed, of all of those things, those are the kinds of policy changes at the level of the state. And what we can do in that regard is to advocate with the state to address those issues, which we have done in the past. Under the previous administration, we met with President Granger and said to him, here are issues of concern to people of African descent. And sir, we will like to go to various ministries and meet with people to talk about getting history, working on improving the history that's taught in schools, ensuring that it is inclusive of the history of people of African descent, not in any way to diminish any other group. We would be able to go to the Ministry of Agriculture to talk about backlands and the need for consistent clearing and problems that people had come to us with, and so on. So those things that you just listed are outside of the capability of a not-for-profit civil society group, but together with government and through advocacy, one can achieve those goals. If with respect to IDPADA-G as a civil society organization, we worked as an organization that fulfilled the gaps that our community identified. Not only did they put together a proposal that I spoke to earlier that delineated precisely what actions they wished to see, we then did a strategic plan and met with stakeholders in over 25 communities to talk about specific activities, specific issues that need to be addressed as priorities. And so our work came out of that, the specific area where we could have responsibility and make an impact, hoping also to work with government through advocacy to see policy changes or programs implemented that would have national impact, the impact of the state that the state can have rather than an institution like ours.
Did IDPADA prepare a document to set out a program of activities or a set of actions that need to be done and present that to government? Because what is very important in this declaration of the United Nations is that there should be a legal framework to address the concerns of people of African descent. So I'm asking you, as the CEO for the organization, have you prepared a document setting out the objectives and the programs as is initiated by the United Nations to safeguard and to protect and to ensure that the social, the economic, and all the different activities of people of African origin in Guyana, that we have a legal framework that protects that?
Mr. Sugrim, thank you for that question. We certainly did produce a strategic plan, and I'm not sure if I would be allowed to share my screen because I would like to be able to show that rather than just to say that we have. Am I allowed to share screen?
Go right ahead. I'm sure the audience will love to see it.
Okay, just 1 second, please. Let's see. I'm not that familiar with Skype anymore. Skype is is not a technology that I use.
Don't remind us.
I'm trying to find it on my screen. I pulled it up, and now I'm trying to locate it. If you give me just one moment. Select tab to preview.
Share screen.
I have it. I did that. Now I'm looking through. Now I have it up on my screen, but now I'm trying to find it, to find how I do that. If you give me 2 more seconds, I should be able to do that. This is very fascinating. 1 more second. Let me see. Oh, window. I go to window, and Isn't this interesting? Why can't I see it?
That's okay, Ms. Sampson, if you're not getting it.
You can explain it though.
No, I can send it to you because I want the public to know.
That's okay. You can explain to the public what the programs that you have prepared, the write-up that you have done.
As I mentioned to you, we prepared a strategic plan for the years 2020 to 2024, because we did the plan in 2019, and it was completed in 2019 so that it would then be available for operationalizing in 2020. And in that program, let me read from the background. The strategic plan 2020 to 2024 for promoting and enhancing the situation of African Guyanese was developed within the framework of the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent under the theme Recognition, Justice, and Development. The plan was developed by a team of consultants at the instance of the International Decade for People of African Descent Assembly Guyana. It utilizes a blended methodology of regional consultations focusing on regions 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 10, in which the majority of African Guyanese reside. Meetings with IDPADA-G member organizations, meetings with policy-making entities such as government ministries, agencies, and commissions, and an extensive literature review on the historical processes and structural forces that have shaped and conditioned African descendants in Guyana from the period of African enslavement to the contemporary period. And so, as I mentioned earlier, that took place with meetings in 25 communities, in addition to the other stakeholders as noted. And it calls for to promote economic advancement, empowerment, and economic agency and self-confidence, expand access to business and entrepreneurial training, which I spoke to about, access to investment capital, capital accumulation, wealth and assets creation, organize African Guyanese entrepreneurs, etc. Create sustainable jobs and employment opportunities for African Guyanese. We have to do that by training. Enhance employability through access to education and training institutions. Enhance appropriate skill levels through skills training, etc. Then rebuild the capacity of African Guyanese collective for learning and self-improvement through education and training. And that's really where we began talking to the Ministry of Education on policy changes that would affect all Guyanese, improving standards that would affect all students in the school system. Reduce systemic and structural inequalities in access to socioeconomic opportunities and goods and services, questions of equity and justice and development, and support the demands of African Guyanese collective in the Caribbean and Latin America and the diaspora for an apology and reparations for injustices. And then, as I said, the issue of youth was cross-cutting.
You can come back on there, Ms. Sampson. Okay. Having said all of that, is there any of the objectives that you have identified that need some legal framework that, if it's not yet in place, that should be put in place by the administration? Was that presented to the administration, the previous one and this one, to ensure that those legal framework are in place to do exactly what your group has laid out in that document?
There are, for example, in terms of
can you get back on live? I'm not sure. Can't share your screen.
Ms. Sampson, you're not back on live.
Oh, so I didn't realize that it had. I am here, but
yeah, we're hearing you. We're not seeing you.
Need to stop screen share. Can you see me now? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
In terms, with the last administration, we were working on issues pertaining to education. That was predominant. We were also looking at questions of, we submitted a petition that came out of our General Assembly on the question of the resuscitation of village councils as a means to address the question of ancestral lands, which is a major issue in our community, the loss of ancestral lands. That petition was submitted to the Ministry of Communities and would have, I suppose, made its way to the Parliament. Other programs were on stream. For example, we wanted to see that there should be, in addition to the ERC, a tribunal that would address questions of where there are ethnic issues and ethnic disputes, etc. But that did not come to fruition. And so it's on, I think it is a matter that Parliament has raised before. It's essentially, quote unquote, on the books, but not established. We have the ERC, but there's yet one more step that should be put in place. And that, again, it's not just about African Guyanese. This is about Guyanese of all ethnicities. It benefits from those kinds of institutions that seek to ensure, to hear complaints and to arbitrate justly. And so, yes, remember now, we started in 2018. The last administration, I think in December 2018, there was, as you know, as you both will recall, in December 2018, we had a real shift in focus for the Parliament in that there was a no confidence motion, which would have affected, I think, any of the kinds of policy, legislative work that administration would have done. Unfortunately, we have not had the privilege of a meeting with the president as we had asked, President Irfan Ali. We've written to His Excellency and we have asked, and we look forward to that because in many ways, he opens the door to government agencies for us. And that's the approach we did in the last administration. We went to the president and we said, Mr. President, here are the things that we would like to talk to you and with your permission to engage ministries. So we look forward to that opportunity because while even as our subvention has been withheld, there is work that we feel we should be able to speak about because not everything requires funding to IDPADA-G. There is a lot of work to be done with respect to policy and programs.
Well, Ms. Sampson, Guyana is a member of the United Nations, and this program that was initiated by the United Nations has strength and teeth. If the existing administration is not receptive to your request, there should be a forum in the United Nations to address that issue. Is your organization affiliated with the United Nations as part of that IDPADA?
Yeah, we attend we participate in the meetings of the working group of experts for people of African descent, which has been the body most active during this decade. More recently, the United Nations established a permanent forum on people of African descent, and we are engaged in that. But as there are calls for input, we have provided input to establish what are the challenges being faced by African descendants in Guyana. And so we have been involved and we have commented and provided information as best we can. One of the things, Mr. Sugrim, I'm sure that you're aware of, and that is that in Guyana, as in many other countries, so I'm not singling Guyana out by any means, but it is a need across the globe that information, particularly when you have vulnerable communities, information that is data that's collected ought to be disaggregated by ethnicity so that one could get a good sense of where there are lags, where one needs to put more resources, where one needs to do some remedial action, etc. And so in our reporting, that has been a weakness because we are unable to state with precision, with data. In some instances there's data, others we have to extrapolate from media reports, etc. Or existing reports.
You know, Ms. Sampson, you in the beginning of the program, you alluded to some of the achievement or some of the progress made by people of African descent, the slaves directly, and then their descendants. And you mentioned a few things.
Please, we don't refer to our ancestors as slaves.
Okay.
They were enslaved Africans.
I get that, and I take that exactly what you said.
What's the difference? I'm curious.
Because we have grown up with the notion that they were slaves, and that is a dehumanizing term. It does not give them an identity. These were enslaved persons. Just like today, we speak of people who are trafficked. They're people, they're individuals, they are persons who are experiencing pain and suffering. And when one speaks of an enslaved African, that is a completely different, it has a completely different message and meaning than the slaves. And I grew up with that language. We all did. But more and more people of African descent worldwide are recognizing that in many ways we dismiss the experience, the pain, the legacy of those persons by referring to them as slaves, which is what.
Well, Ms. Sampson, I get your point, but what I'm gonna say is that not to demonize our ancestors. And you know, they were enslaved, and we recognize that, and their descendants continue to do what you just said. They dig the canals, they build the bridges, they build the roads, they build the seawalls, they build all these different things that we call home today. Had it not been for the African descent in Guyana, we might not have had that. So what I'm saying to you is that even if the government is not receptive to IDPADA per se, Guyana, because of whatever reason they might have, any government should be magnanimous enough to recognize the importance of this community, people of African descent. And the United Nations have made it an international decade for all people of African descent around the world, including Guyana. So it is incumbent on every government, whether they like it or not, to give credence to that United Nations edict. And that's what I'm saying to you. If the government is not receptive to listening to IDPADA, which represent that arm of the United Nations for the people of African descent in Guyana, then there should be a recourse somewhere else. We know, for instance, if we are wronged by someone, we can go to the court for determination. So have you addressed your fellow CARICOM groups? I'm sure within CARICOM there are groups, and I've read of those in St. Vincent, in St. Lucia, and so on. Have you talked to them to see what pressure they can put on any government to ensure that the programs that IDPADA is putting in place, that they get the legal framework to ensure it's done, and secondly, the funding to also get it done?
Okay, we have the framework, and I've already pointed that out to you. So that is not a to-do on our a list of tasks anymore. We have that, and it certainly is in line with the program of activities. We have engaged other organizations across the Caribbean. You know, what is this interesting distinction between the African Guyanese community and the Afro-Caribbean community across CARICOM is that, with the exception, as you know, of Trinidad and Suriname, the other nations are predominantly people of African descent. And so that when a government passes its annual budget, the funds that are being spent for the community are being spent for largely people of African descent. It does not mean that they don't have issues that they want to address. Every nation has its issues, there's no question. But so we have that difference. So we are teaching people across the Caribbean about the distinction that while you are, this is the way that our nation differs from yours, and people of African descent are not in a position, the positions that you hold, right? The budget of our nation has to be dealt with equitably, should be across all ethnicities. And these are the things that we are fighting for. And so that is a work in progress. We do try to engage those communities and other communities worldwide. It's very interesting that while we engage the United Nations and we have, specifically the secretariat that supports the UN International Decade for People of African Descent, other nations, other African descendant communities find IDPADA-G, the institution, an interesting model that they would like to adopt. For example, the Australians, they're Afro-Australians, there's a large community there with whom we've met, and they are studying how we're structured and seeking to mirror that as they seek to address the decade and beyond. It's, the decade is coming to a close, but just like us, they feel that an institution such as ours has merit beyond the decade to address those issues. And that's just one. We've spoken to other people in other countries who also feel that this is the model that they would like to adopt for their country. So yes, we're talking to people in the Caribbean, perhaps not as many as we would like to. We have been reaching out to Belize, etc. But we are working on it, Mr. Sugrim.
There are reports, as you know, in the press, maybe more than a year ago, of the government having a clash with IDPADA because of the financing and how the money is being spent. Was there an audit done with your books to ensure that all the expenses you incurred is in conformity with the program?
Absolutely. Let me tell you, yes, this was in this was last year, but even the year before, in December of 2021, the Ministry of Finance called me one afternoon. It must have been on a Thursday afternoon at around 3 to say, Mrs. Sampson, I'd like to come over to discuss a matter with you regarding IDPADA-G's financials. And I said, sir, please do come over. And he came within a half an hour. And he said, we are concerned about IDPADA-G's financial management, and we would like to conduct an audit. I will bring a letter tomorrow regarding that. And the next day he did. And he said that we would be starting an audit of your organization on the following Monday at 8:30. And on Monday at 8:30, they arrived, and they had free access to whatever they wished for the length of time they were there. I think it was a total of 3 weeks. They left and went back to the Ministry of Finance, and then came back, asked to come back, and they spent an additional week or two. And then in March of 2022, they produced a report which in no way reprimanded IDPADA-G. In no way reprimanded IDPADA-G. The only areas of concern occurred in 2018 when we had just started, and we were not attaching our checks to specific expenditures. And so we were able to correct that. But from 2019 on, there was absolutely no area of reprimand at all. Right? And so we have that report in our files. It covered the year 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021, right? So last year, when this question of IDPADA-G's whether we were transparent, accountable, in fact, questioning our integrity, we reminded government that not only do we do an annual audit, we have an audit company, we do have an audit report that has to be submitted, and we have done that for every year. Not only do we have that those audits, but we also had this audit that was done, as the Ministry of Finance referred to it, a special investigative audit that was in depth, that looked at everything it wanted to look at, and found that we have been transparent, totally accountable, and that our integrity is intact. Right? We offered last year, when government raised that, since the only unaudited period would have been the 2022, the very year of the accusation, and we were willing to be audited on the spot for whatever months there were already in 2022. Right? Even though there was no audit due until the end of the year, we said, please feel free, come and audit right now.
You said in 2022, you got funding up until August, about 60 million.
Mm-hmm.
What about 2023?
We have not received any funding.
Any reason given?
No reason given then or now. We were not given any notification in September last year that we were not going to receive our monthly subvention. We got no notification. We submitted our monthly paperwork, as we are always required to do, and we submitted that on time. And then there was silence. We called, should we come to pick up our check? No, Ms. Sampson, we don't know. And so that's how no government has never informed us about why it is that our subvention has been withheld. And similarly, we have not received a subvention for 2023.
Has IDPADA written to the president and copied to the Secretary General of the United Nations?
We wrote first to the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sport, just to ask the minister to provide us with some information, because that's only proper. That's the ministry from which the subvention would come, to ask for some direction, explanation. We did not get a response. Having not received a response, we wrote to the next minister who would have to do with the specifics of financing, of funding, and that was the Minister of Finance, who also did not respond to our request. And so the step we then took was to file in court a writ requesting our subvention, and so that's where we are right now.
How did we come up with the 100 million per year? Who came up with that number?
We presented a budget. We actually presented a budget that was much more than that, and that's what Parliament reduced it to.
Okay. Again, is there a reason why you think the government is holding up funding to IDPADA? After you said the audit was done and there was no red flag in the audit?
Sir, I wish I could. I don't wish to, on a program, surmise anything. I don't wish to do that. I think that government has its reasons. Those reasons have not as yet come out in our court case. Nothing that we can understand as of the period when that was stopped. Recently, government has said, 4 organizations have said that they are dissatisfied. That's 4 organizations out of 65. So, but that is after the fact. That's like during this year. What happened in September? What is it that happened in August of 2022 that led to the withholding of our subvention? A question that we have no idea. We have no idea, but we do have one thing. We have the determination that our ancestors have given us, just as the same way that they persevered for centuries and made it beyond enslavement into emancipation, the same determination is within us to keep going. And so here we are, working every day to find ways to keep our doors open. One of the things that we accomplished in this time period, I haven't talked about a lot that we've done, but one of our accomplishments too was the establishment of a credit union, because one of the issues that our people have complained about is the inability to access banking services and small loans and so on for small businesses and families. So we have a credit union that was started in June of 2020. So we are going to keep the credit union, of course, a separate entity, but IDPADA-G itself will keep pursuing our work. Capacity building, we have trained contractors, small contractors. We have trained over 77 contractors with 4-week training programs. We trained 4 groups. There are 4 groups, so they got one-on-one training, how to properly submit a bid. How do you make sure that what is it that's required? How are you successful? And then 2, what are the ethics of contracting, right? And that's a 4-week training program. I know that recently one of the current ministers of government offered a 1-day training program. Ours was 4 weeks of classes that were held twice a week, and they were 2.5 hours per class. So it was in depth, right? We have had training programs on how to develop a business plan, or we have had people come into our office and sit down with staff and help them to produce a business plan. People who needed help writing proposals come in and sit down with us, we'll help. So that's what the staff did. That's why we had a staff. Last year, we did on the second of a marketing program, as I would call it, an opportunity for small businesses to exhibit their produce, the things that they produce, and to sell. We had done a smaller version of it before in December of 2021 at Coffee Square, where we had about 30 small businesses under tents, really nice event, and they were able to sell their rare. We had helped them ahead of time, what is your little spiel that you're going to give? We made ads for each of them from that event, put those ads on our Facebook page so they could market their products. Last year, we did that on a larger scale on Main Street for 2 days in the run-up to emancipation in Main Street. We had over 90 small businesses there with their products. But what is the thing? The thing that I like about that, they were very excited and they did well. But to me, what makes that a valuable experience is that 2 months prior, we had a training program for them on costing, packaging, and marketing, so that when they got to there, they were well prepared. They knew how to price their items. They knew how to market them properly. They were well prepared with their promotional materials, whether it's a business card or whatever, their Facebook page. That, to me, made that a comprehensive event where someone stepped away from that, really not just having made good sales on a day, but well equipped to move on up.
Recently in newspaper, the government is reported the government is giving grants to small African descent communities. Do you know which one of those communities received grants from the government?
The government this year announced last week, actually, that it would give, I believe that the letter said, instead of giving a subvention to IDPADA-G, it would use that $100 million to give small grants to our member organizations. So it's member organizations. Most of them not all of them did not receive a letter. Not all of them were invited to submit a proposal. But those who did were given 48 hours to submit a proposal. And it was the letter said that the proposal should meet the guidelines of the UN International Decade. But as you've just read, they're very, very broad. They were not given specific grant guidelines, so I'm not sure how those proposals are going to be reviewed and judged. But so that is what you were referring to.
Is this a classical third world politicians of divide and rule, or is it we learned from the first world divide and rule? Is that what we are doing currently, you think?
Well, whatever it is, it appears that way, but I think that it's a very difficult situation, as you can imagine. We have told our organizations that they should make their own decisions. We will not tell an organization what to do, but what we do know, even though the letter said that the subvention will be divided, the subvention that cannot be the subvention, because the subvention is a matter under dispute in court. And so they're giving cash grants to our members. They're giving them offer of cash grant, and some members may choose to take it and others may decide not to. But we have not done any kind of survey to find out how people have decided to go one way or another. I do know that we had calls from persons that said, but IDPADA-G has usually helped us with proposals we've had to write. Some of them, fortunately, had participated in some of the proposal writing training programs that we've done, and we've done at least 4 or 5 training programs. So some of them will. Also, last year, we had a grant program that we began it in February. So then when the vice president made his comment about us not giving grants, we're not a grant making institution, but we had set aside a little bit of money that we would try to give, because we always, every year, give about $60,000 to organizations who requested it for events or so on. So last year, we tried to up it to 100,000. And in February, we started a training program that would help people to write their proposals. So from February through May, it was a little break around Easter, but February through May, people worked on this training program, submitted their proposals with our assistance. Staff worked one-on-one with persons to really, so that at the end of it, even though it was in-house, even though it was IDPADA-G and its members, when the decisions we made in-house, it was a process to learn so that you could go out into the larger world and compete and write a proposal. So some of the member organizations had gone through that and would have had proposals that they could then submit to government. And some of them have told us that thanks to IDPADA-G, they will be able to submit.
And before Dr. Rose come on, I'm not sure the thinking of the government. I don't know how the government thinks because I'm not part of the government. But instead of auditing one organization, IDPADA, now they have to audit 20 or 30 different subsector for the grants that they're giving. To me, it doesn't make sense. There's not value for money there, but I guess that's the government thinking. Dr. Rose?
Ms. Sampson, the problem between your organization and the government is that the government said the money was not spent the way it was designed or supposed to be spent. Did you have any guidelines of how the money was supposed to be spent?
The government may have said that, Dr. Rose, but every year we submitted a budget and indicated exactly what activities would be carried out. And every month, in order to receive the subvention, we would submit a subset of that. So at no point did government contact us to say that you are not adhering to your plan, because we have done exactly what we said we would do. We did exactly what we said we would do. So I am not here to, I just simply have to say that there was perhaps some misunderstanding on their part. I mean, I have to be generous. I can't imagine that they would want to deliberately harm a large portion of the community.
The government did say that you are not transparent, but you said they did the audit and they found nothing wrong. But my other question to you, there are other organizations in the Caribbean, your counterparts there. Have you contacted them and tell them of the problems you're having here?
Yeah, we have, and we have spoken in international fora. So we have publicized what our situation. We have written to the UN. I think Mr. Sugrim asked me that earlier.
Right.
We did. We've written to the United Nations, etc. The United Nations is very aware of what has transpired with IDPADA-G, but the United Nations, as in all bureaucracies, the wheels turn slowly. So I'm not sure, and I'm not sure how much they can really weigh in with the government of Guyana, other than to urge that the government of Guyana continue to support the work of the decade, particularly in a country where it is so obvious, just by observation, that the community of African descendants in Guyana has great needs. One can observe that very quickly. And so one would hope that international and an interest shown by the United Nations to government might persuade them. I really would rather not make surmise.
Did the United Nations specifically stated that the government's supposed to provide subventions to this organization or others in the Caribbean as well?
No. That was a decision made at the level of Parliament in Guyana. That had nothing to do with the United Nations. But what the United Nations did say in the same document that Dr. Sugrim referenced, that states have a responsibility to ensure a long list of things. There's 16 items that states ought to do, and to do them in some instances in conjunction with civil society. Civil society has a role to play. And so in Guyana, civil society came together under the umbrella of IDPADA-G on this issue. And so in cutting out from IDPADA-G, which is, by the way, also identified as the country coordinating mechanism for the decade, right? In cutting out the resources, government is in many ways handicapping its own ability to achieve the goals of the decade.
IDPADA-G, did the UN recognize IDPADA-G as the umbrella organization for Guyana?
We have a relationship with the United Nations.
No, but
yes.
did it recognize that it's the umbrella organization?
I'm not sure that within the UN system there's a way to recognize us solely as that. But we do the reporting.
I asked that question because if the government says it's going to bypass IDPADA-G and go to member organizations, is the government violating the United Nations principle? But since you said they do not recognize you, so there's no bypass, there's no principle to be violated there.
Well, but here's the difficulty. Well, it's not a difficulty for government. The United Nations expects reporting on various aspects of the decade and its accomplishments or lack thereof, or efforts to accomplish. And those reports come from both the state and civil society. Will 65 individual organizations be reporting to the United Nations? How is Guyana going to appear on the world stage as a nation when we destroy or seek to destroy an entity that is seeking to ensure the human rights, the progress, and the well-being of a large segment of its population? IDPADA-G is not harming anyone. IDPADA-G is simply doing the work of the decade as articulated by the United Nations resolution, a resolution signed on to by this current government when it was in office in 2013.
Okay, now here is a contention I have. You said that IDPADA-G has been training people to write business proposals get them food certificates, those who want to sell and so forth, and training contractors. But they're not government agencies that do that already, so this is not a duplication of services?
There's no such thing, sir. Which government agency trains people to write, to write bids? Which government? No, there's none. There's none. And the reason we got involved with helping people with registration for SBB is because it was I don't know if it still is, it was an arduous process, a very difficult process. And so we helped persons. We taught some, and we helped them to go through that process. Food handlers, people did not understand what is the process by which I get that they needed that was an enhancement to their business. So we brought in the agency responsible for that certification to talk to people. This is what you should be doing. Here is how to improve, here to make sure that you don't make people sick. Here is what you have to do to get your food handlers. And when you get it, you can display it and people will feel more comfortable purchasing your food.
But the Ministry of Health has been doing that, though.
That's where they get it, from the Ministry of Health. But where's the outreach?
Okay. You said you have met with President Ali.
We have reached out to His Excellency. We've sought a meeting with him, but he has not responded to our letter. Both the chair and I met him. Ran into him at events 3 times and reminded him, and in each instance, he vowed that the meeting would take place, but unfortunately that has not as yet happened.
Have you tried to meet with Prime Minister Mark Phillips?
We have. We sent a letter to the Prime Minister, but they have not gotten a response.
So they're actually boycotting you all?
Yeah, it's your terminology, sir. I'm just waiting.
Let me ask you this question. The previous government gave you all money without trying to stop you all and trying to say, well, what you all doing with money and so forth and so forth.
No, please. I would like to correct that, because you would give the impression that there was no oversight. We had to submit.
I understand your oversight. And this government came in and something went wrong, and they stopped this because they give you all in 2020, they give in 2021, and they did not give in 2022. They stopped it. What do you think went wrong?
Well, one of our member organizations, Coffee 250, held its annual forum, and they have been around since 2012, held its annual forum. And the title of the forum was Resisting the Emerging Apartheid State. That was their topic, right? That's a member organization. Member organizations' events, we advertise them. We advertise it on our Facebook page. As simple as that. And then as they would say, the trouble started. The trouble started.
That's what the government says. Or you're saying that?
Well, I just noted the coincidence that one thing happened followed by the other. The Coffee 250's conference followed by the curtailment of our subvention. And so that too is an issue, because that's a freedom of speech issue, and that has nothing to do with IDPADA-G. That has to do with Coffee 250, and that's a freedom of speech issue.
Agreed. But since the government refused to give you any subvention for this year, don't you think it's right to call up your fellow organizations in the Caribbean? You all meet and try to have a meeting with the Secretary General of the United Nations to explain your problem or put forth your problem to them and tell them what's going on?
Well, we have been exploring, and we have gone as far as we can with the United Nations and are moving forward quite nicely in keeping them informed, etc. I don't think that the way the United Nations works, to just have a meeting with the Secretary General may not be effective. We may have that meeting, but one has to go through various stages, through special procedures, etc., in order to make one's case. And so we are working through the system as is required to do.
IDPADA-G ever given any scholarship to students to study at UG?
Yeah, we've supported students. We supported one student at law school at Hugh Wooding. He's now at the bar. We provided partial support to yet another law student, and just then our subvention was yanked, so we were not able to complete our commitment. We have yes, and we provided support to a few students at UG. But remember now, with $100 million, it sounds like a lot of money, but if you have to have a staff and make the lights keep the lights on and water and telephone and so on, we did not have a huge budget. We put aside $1 million a year for scholarship. We put aside $1 million a year for scholarships, and that's what we did.
Okay. Now, how large is your staff? Can I ask?
Right now, we are few. Before we had to lay off our staff, and at that time we had before we laid off seven project officers and project and other assistants in the office, like finance. I mean, our finance office has been reduced to one person with a part-time other person. We only have two persons who are involved in project work at the moment. And we have an assistant expediter because we just have things, and slash messenger slash credit union clerk. So we are down to the very, very minimum. There are 8 now, 8 persons in all from 18. And we are not able to be, we raise funds every month to make sure those people get something. People aren't getting fully paid. They get what we can, what we can help, what we can find. And so we're trying to raise funds to support them. An organization has been formed here in the United States as a not-for-profit and registered on the IRS, Friends of IDPADA-G. And I'd like, your listening audience to know Friends of IDPADA-G is a way of supporting that organization. One can do that via Zelle. I'm not sure whether you have a prohibition on fundraising on your program, but yeah.
Yeah, I can use Zelle. Now, do you think politics got into the way for you not getting your subvention?
Given the way that Guyana operates, given the culture of our nation, and I am quite sure that that is the case. However, we are affecting the growth and stability of our nation, not just one community. By affecting one community, we affect all. We affect all. And so while that may well be the case, I am hoping that government sees the importance of standing tall on the world stage and saying, look at what we are doing to celebrate or to ensure that to celebrate people of African descent and to make sure that the goals of the decade are achieved. Guyana could, with its resources now, really be a glowing example to the rest of the world on how one achieves equity in a diverse society. Guyana should not seek to go down the road of so many states that become wealthy, where you have huge numbers of impoverished people of all races, because not only people of African descent in Guyana are poor, there are a lot of other poor people who are of East Indian origin or are indigenous, etc. So the programs that IDPADA-G would like to be able to discuss with the president will lift all boats. This is not exclusive to people of African descent. When we speak about a breakfast program for students who don't go to school because they don't have food, that is not just for people of African descent. That's for all children who need food at school so they can go to school.
Okay. You touched on something earlier which piqued my mind. You said the word slaves or slave should not be used because it's derogatory. Who made it derogatory?
I didn't say it was derogatory. I said that it takes away personhood. It takes away personhood.
Okay.
We speak of of enslaved Africans. That has a whole different meaning. It brings to your own imagination what that might be. Slaves, when speaking of slaves, they are othered in that way. They are completely separate from humankind. They are slaves, as though born lesser. We were not. The persons that they brought from the continent of Africa came from communities, came from towns and villages, were skilled craftsmen, were skilled weavers, were skilled farmers, were persons who worked gold or iron. These are the people that were brought, not just people who were living in trees or whatever it is the British used to try to tell us.
Now, so you're saying IDPADA-G said that we must use the word enslaved.
Not just this is across the United States and everywhere else. People no longer say slaves. People say enslaved Africans. So I'm not, you can check it, as they say, you can Google it.
My colleague just published a book, The History of Slavery in America, and he used the word slaves throughout. And the book just came out at the end of February here.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but ask him to check.
And I got a book coming out in about 2 months, and it talks about slavery as well.
Yeah, it speaks about slavery, but
I mentioned the word slaves. I don't know if I mentioned enslaved maybe a couple of times, but I mentioned the word slaves.
Yeah.
So in America, the word is still predominantly used.
Well, sir, if you feel comfortable, if that's your preference, then please do. I would just.
No, but I'm saying what the academic literature is telling us. And I got a friend, Dr. Daniels in Jamaica. He also published a book. I read it just a few days ago. I think it came out late last year. And he talked about slaves in Jamaica and what they were doing and so forth.
But it's also, I guess that will catch up with whomever. But remember that in Guyana, people still refer to us sometimes as Negroes.
Okay. But so when you said the word slaves, I said, okay, let me just touch on that. Now, my other question to you is this. You're not getting any subvention from the government. Mm-hmm. They're going to give the organizations. What will IDPADA-G do? You all will close shop?
No, we will not.
Continue to raise funds from...
We'll continue to raise funds. We will submit proposals for various projects, and we will continue our work. Because the work of the decade was not going to be done in a decade. And so we are not going to abandon that mission. We will continue to strive. I may not live long enough to see us accomplish all, because the work that has to be done will take decades upon decades. And so hopefully there will be a continuous stream of people coming on board to keep this going for as long as it takes. For as long as it takes. We are determined that IDPADA-G and its work will continue because it's valuable work. And we just hope that the government sees value in what we do and comes on board and supports what we do, because it will only make it better and have greater impact for us to have a stable, safe society.
If you have a minute, what would you tell President Ali now?
If I had a minute, I would say to President Ali that IDPADA-G is doing a lot of the work that he has identified as critical for the state, for Guyana. IDPADA-G is providing opportunities through capacity building. We're helping small businesses to develop. We are working with women who are small business owners and others to ensure that all boats rise, that the kind of nation that he envisions is being built one person at a time.
Do you support his One Guyana initiative?
I understand its thrust, and to me, it says exactly what the national motto says, which is one people, one nation, one destiny. And so he speaks to a country whose diversity, who comes together in diversity, a country that comes together in its diversity. And so that is certainly honorable. our motto says, the national motto, the official motto says the exact same thing. And so I have no problem with his One Guyana insofar as it reflects the national motto.
And one other question. Why don't you call a meeting and tell all your member organizations about what the government is doing to you?
Oh, the government, we've had meetings. Our organizations are fully aware. Remember I said the General Assembly is the highest decision-making body, so they have to be kept informed. So we have brought our members together. We have informed them. They've given us a message to take back to the UN when we've gone. I mean, our General Assembly is fully involved and fully aware.
Okay, Charles, closing.
We run out of time, Ms. Sampson. We want to thank you. I know, just for information, with the establishment of the Decade of People of African Descent, the UN has appointed the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights to act as coordinator of the decade. And maybe that might be a forum for you to address. We want to thank you for coming on stream. There's a lot more questions we need to ask, but time has run out on us. Maybe sometime in the future, we'll ask you to come back so we can continue the discussion. So,
I'd love to. Thank you so much for inviting me this evening. I really appreciated the opportunity to speak about IDPADA-G and its work. And I hope that I have provided some information that you may not have had before.
And thank you for coming on. And I hope our audience also learned something from what IDPADA is doing in Guyana. Dr. Rose, anything in closing quickly?
Well, I must thank you for coming on to explain your situation and where you are with IDPADA-G right now. And I wish IDPADA-G and the people of African descent all across the world the very best of luck in achieving their goal by 2024. And as you said, beyond 2024, it has to continue. So I applaud you, and I applaud the people who are fighting for recognition in this area. Thanks.
Thank you again, Ms. Sampson, and thank you our audience. Thank you to Nohar and to Ryan. Until the next time, God bless our great country, Guyana.